Hello, my friends. Victor Robert Kahn here. I thought this time I would talk to you about some books that I wish I'd had when I was young. It would have helped me a lot. I'm going to talk about some art books that I think every artist should have in his library. I picked one book for each subject, except for one, where I chose two because I think they're both good. So the first book I'm going to talk about is Dynamic Figure Drawing by Burne Hogarth. Somewhere along the line, I lost the dust cover to mine. This is what it looks like. So this is the best book on drawing the human figure for artists. It shows how to draw the human figure in perspective. So one of the first things that we cover is this, the torso and the pelvis. And the way this is drawn like a barrel in a little box is still the way I draw figures today. I start with that, just like Burne Hogarth told us. This is it from another angle. Once you learn this, you can start to draw the figure correctly from different angles. Here he shows how the limbs are basically cylinders, and they can be shown from different angles, and you just need to work on drawing them like this to get the perspective of the limbs. This is what really helped me make so I could draw figures the way I wanted them to, foreshortened and coming towards you and looking in a natural way. So if this was your limb here, like this was a leg, like here, this is what it is from this angle, this one, and this one shows very clearly how it works. Here's another way to do it. So this is full of illustrations. Everything is drawn out. You got the hands, every part of the human body, and how it's drawn in different perspectives. Burne Hogarth was a great artist. He's most well known for drawing the Tarzan comic book and the comic strip. So this is a book I didn't get until I was 21. I wish I had a copy of it when I was about 7 or 8 years old. It would have been very, very helpful and saved me a lot of time and frustration and anguish. Next book, for portraits, I chose two books because I think they're both good. They're not that expensive, so I think you can benefit by getting both if you can find a copy of them. So the first one is Portrait Drawing by Wendon Blake, drawings by John Long. So this one's very good. It starts with the very basics that you need, starting with the shape of the head, where the eyes are located. All these little lines, I still draw these like this just to make sure it's right. And then it goes on to all the little things you need. The eyes, mouth, all the things that you need are here. Showing them from different angles, working through a full portrait from the very beginning to the end. So I highly recommend this one. The next one is Drawing a Likeness by Douglas Graves. And this one talks a little bit more about just like the details and how to finish it, and what to start with, and then if you have problems, what to do with them, how you can fix them, what might be wrong with a particular one. And it goes through a number of these studies of going from a photograph to a drawing, from a basic drawing until it's completely finished. So I recommend these two to practice your portrait drawing. And while I'm on the subject, I'll just talk about the fact that if you're drawing a character, like say the Fantastic Four, what you can do is to model your characters on a real person, someone you have access to a lot of pictures of, and that way it will have a consistent look, even if you don't particularly nail the look of the actual person. That's something John Byrne used to do when he was drawing comics. Next up is Perspective for Comic Book Artists by David Chelsea. This is the best book on perspective I've ever seen. It covers everything, the horizon line, 1-point, 2-point, 3-point perspective, and covers it in depth. I have this book always on my shelf nearby, especially when I'm drawing, because I need to look at it and refer to it quite a bit. It's been incredibly helpful. And it's told in basically a comic book format. And even here, as it goes through, you can see there's different kinds of perspective. There's 1-point, 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 3-point. It goes through all of it, and it covers everything very thoroughly in a very entertaining way. It talks about depth cues, about the things like foreshortening and having one thing in front of the other so that you know what's closer to you, what's further back. Talks about how to draw things in perspective, how this tube looks like a square until you turn it. So this is a chapter of the horizon and the vanishing point. Talks about how when, for instance, if you were up high, then the horizon line would be very high. If you're down low, it would be down low on your page. Something I'd actually figured out on my own when I was younger, but it was good to see it in a book like this. And this shows how once you have the horizon line, that is your eye line. Someone taller than you is going to be above it. Someone shorter than you will be below it. So this talks about the different kind of angles for a 2-point. And this shows how to map it out. This is what it looks like from one angle. And then a slightly different angle, the same room, and a different one, and a different one. Just to give you an idea of how that works. This one I like. It just shows a true 3-point perspective, which is not, I'm sorry, this is this one shows a true 3-point perspective. You can see how it diminishes as it gets smaller, it diminishes as it gets higher. This is kind of a fake 3-point for when you're in a hurry, just make everything straight. See how much better this one looks because it gives that sense of scale. And this one just looks like a bunch of little blocks. And here, this talks about how to do the 3-point perspective. All of this is very in-depth. You can just study this for quite some time. It's an outstanding book. I can't recommend it enough. Even circles and perspective. This is something that I'm still working to master. This kind of book it's so helpful. Just go through this and you can just learn everything. There's something for everybody. Every artist can learn from this book. It's just outstanding, and of course you can use it to help teach other people too. But it's just been tremendously helpful to me. I wish I'd had this when I was younger and starting out and just trying to learn how to draw. Perspective for comic book artists, and not just for comic book artists, for any artist. Next up is the Watson Drawing Book by Ernest and Aldrin Watson. Your cover may not look like this. This is an older edition. You can get this book on Amazon. The cover may be different. So this book is more of a general instruction book. It covers all kinds of things. The chapter on perspective is really good. This shows the difference between perspective where it's off, those wheels clearly not going to work, and then redraws it here a little better. This is something you could just practice drawing from memory. So it shows you a little bit about vanishing points here. This whole chapter is good. And this one I particularly liked as it shows this done this way, and then it kind of elevates that roadway and shows you how it would be done. This is something else I practiced after seeing this in the book. And of course at the top here, it's more about doing things in perspective with the vanishing point, sorry. And here looking at this, you can see, this is a site you might come upon and say, I want to draw that. It shows where the horizon line is, where the vanishing points are, if that road is elevated this way, if you're standing over here and it's going the other way, how to draw it, how to set it up with the vanishing point. That's another good one. So this one was also very helpful, showing it just a little bit off to the side here instead of straight down like that. And that's just a chapter on perspective. It covers a whole host of topics, movement. Like, look at that one. That's a great drawing. Wouldn't you like to be able to draw like that? We all would. So it shows a number of works of old masters. I was amused to see this drawing here. That's by Charles Dana Gibson, who is one of my favorite illustrators. He was active around the turn of the century. He was the creator of the famous Gibson Girl. It was actually based on his wife. So this is an oldie but a goodie. It was written quite a while ago, but it's very, very good. I continue to learn from it. It's got all kinds of things in here. This covers everything, pretty much everything you need to know. A little bit on each particular topic that you need to know about drawing. So I highly recommend this one, the Watson Drawing Book. Next up, Drawing with Pen and Ink by Arthur L. Guptill. This is a really good one. It basically is from what's a little more technical. It covers everything, including the different types of pen that you might use for this. Shows you some different drawings by other different artists using pen and ink. Just kind of give you an idea of what you can do. It shows all the tools you're going to need. This covers everything right from the beginning. And I mean when you begin working, when you begin learning art. All the materials you'll need. Shows even the different kinds of brush strokes and how to do them. This is a great little drawing here. This is something that you could take. I mean, it's kind of a chaotic composition. This is something that an aspiring artist could take and look at and say, how could I improve this? How could I add some contrast? Could I make these different figures more or less clear? What really stands out? And look at the perspective. The perspective on these buildings is all wrong, but it's still a kind of an entertaining picture. Is this something that you could look at and say, can I draw this better? Again, showing the different kind of hatching and cross-hatching that you can do. There's an excellent picture by Joseph Clement Kahl, another great artist who just did hundreds of work. They were all great. Well, this tremendous, fantastic line work. And here we have the chapter on light and shade. And what this shows is the different ways that you can depict the light and the shade, different hatching that you can use. Same thing here. I sometimes look at this to decide which way I'm going to illustrate something, which kind of hatching I'm going to use to depict the shadows. This is another good one. Even just something like this you can look at and see how it was drawn and how you might draw it in a similar way or in a different way. This is a good section here. It talks about the different ways you draw vegetation. It's something you're always going to be needing when you're illustrating something. Unless your story's set in a desert or something like that. It shows the shading here, light, dark, what's in front, silhouettes. I'm not very good at drawing vegetation, so books like this are actually very helpful for me. Architectural rendering. Here's a good section because you're always going to be drawing things like buildings. People live in cities, they live in towns, and you need to draw this. Here's a nice in-perspective drawing. This one is great. Just think about how you would draw something like that with it in perspective. You might try it from another angle. And this book covers all that. There's another great one, very well composed. It's got nice contrast. Another one. And then it goes on to cover the interiors as well. This one, it says Vocational Education Unit. So this is just a place where people, like there's a buffer, sander, drill bits. So this was a real place, someone, or maybe designed for a real place that could be used, and have to draw all that in perspective. If you're an artist, you have to think about where the vanishing points are, and that looks like a 3-point perspective. And so things like that would be very helpful. You could try drawing something like this yourself. Here's another one. So I highly recommend this book, and it talks about even learning from other artists. So drawing with pen and ink. Get that one. Next up, Drawing Scenery, Landscapes and Seascapes by Jack Ham. This book is obviously all about drawing scenery, but it's very helpful in other ways. This also talks about not just what you're drawing, but composition. Here it shows how you start with very basic shapes, just some verticals and diagonals, and how you can turn that into a forest. Here's a kind of a simplified version, and then the finished version right here. It talks about where your eyes go on the picture. The principle of the threes. So this is sometimes called the rule of threes, where the picture is divided up into 3 different sections. And it's very common. It's basically the way it's used in almost all kinds of composition. Here it talks just a little bit about pencils and papers, basically what it would look like using different pencils on different kinds of paper. Shading. So creating distance, it shows how you would start with something very simple, different ways to kind of create the illusion of depth. Like see the things that are darker and larger in front, and they get lighter and smaller as they go back. It's very simple, but it's something that everyone has to kind of learn as they become an artist. Depth and distance covers the same thing of showing different ways to create that illusion of depth. Ooh, and contrast. So this section is about contrasting values. So you see light, dark, light, and you can use that to focus the eye on a different part, whatever part of the picture that you want. and it covers a lot about drawing vegetation, very helpful for someone like me who's not real good at drawing that stuff. I have to work very hard at it. And it shows how to draw these things in perspective. And also, it's got things like this, talking about reflections, the different kind of reflections that you would see depending on the condition of the water. If you're drawing from memory and don't have a model standing in front of you, you're not at the location, these kind of things are kind of hard to remember. So it helps to have a book like this to kind of help you along. It shows the difference between a very, very clear reflection, and because the water is very still, and then one that is a little rougher because the water is more rough. Here you can see how these solid objects are reflected on the water, whether it's leaning towards you, leaning away, or upright. All these things. It's really an excellent book that covers all these kind of things, light and all the things on the water. So I recommend Drawing Scenery also. Last but not least, we have Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. And this book is not really a how-to book. It's more explaining the art of storytelling and how it works, specifically in the comic book medium. But what is stated here is applicable to pretty much all forms of storytelling. So one of the first things that Mr. McCloud talks about is abstraction and how specific things can be generalized. So we start here with a photo of a man and then a drawing. And then he goes to show that as the drawing goes from concrete to abstract, it becomes more relatable. Cough Squad represent. And that is why the what you might call the narrator of this book is drawn in a very stylized way. It's more relatable than if Mr. McCloud were to draw a realistic portrait of himself. So it goes on later to show that we have these little tropes that work in comics to show emotion. These little hearts here, person just disappears. Pain. Normally when you're in pain, you don't have little lightning bolts coming off your hand. You don't really see stars. Well, occasionally you do if you get hit in the head, but all these things, you don't have little dots coming out of your eyes when you're looking at something. You don't really have these when you're shivering. There's no sparks coming off when you hit the ground. And he shows the difference between, again, a realistic drawing, an abstract drawing of a worried person, the same drawing with a little bit of sweat, a little more sweat, and then sweat flying off in a comic fashion. And this is the most effective. Everybody understands this. The same thing with these pictures here. Each of these shows a different kind of emotional state, just like these here. These are taken from Japanese manga, so they're a little more stylized than we'd have in the West. The same thing here, talking about all the ways that the visual medium can represent feelings. And here, you don't have little energy bolts and sparks coming off when you're upset. You don't have fire coming off you when you're angry. As he says, this spiral here shows insanity much better than just the guy staring at you and saying, I just want you to know that I'm onto your plot. I know you put something in my dog's food that made him not love me anymore. So these little things here, they're abstract. They're not real. They're a style. They're a trope that's been invented over the years. That's all I'm going to talk about for right now. I think I'm going to actually do a separate video to talk about this book entirely. It's got so much in it that a storyteller can learn from. If you're interested in any kind of storytelling, whether it's comics, movies, whatever, I highly recommend this book. It might take you a while to get through it. Well, you can see how thick it is, but it contains just nothing but great material. So all these books are ones that I have and that I've used extensively, and I recommend to you if you're an aspiring artist or storyteller.